During the week, we had a gathering of some of our young adults, and it was a bit of an open discussion around the topic of dating and marriage. And in the midst of the conversation, there was a bit of discussion around how the rest of the world looks at these two concepts. You know, very different to how the church understands marriage. And the comment was made that for a lot of people, they would say that marriage is almost like a form of oppression. You know, that down through the centuries, women have been possessions of their husbands. They've been owned, and they've not been free. So there's a bit of discussion around this idea and trying to compare that to what the church's actual vision is when we talk of marriage being a covenant. And recognizing that even though the church has this beautiful vision, it often just gets smothered by culture. You know, culture has a particular idea of what marriage should be, and the church's vision kind of gets buried underneath that. And so we're trying to break open what this idea of covenant really looks like. Because covenant is not a contract, it's not an agreement, it's an exchange of people. So this accusation that marriage is like possession or the woman being owned by the husband, in some sense it's true, but it's only half true. Because what happens in a marriage is you give yourself entirely and completely to the other person, and they now own you. But in response, they give themselves entirely and completely back to you, and so you now own them. And that's the complete story of it. You both become like slaves to each other. Or in some sense, you become slaves working towards a mutual goal, which is for the life of your family and for the next generation. And really, it only works when both parties are fulfilling the covenant. You know, sadly, as we do see in the ways that culture can influence marriage, you do have the situation where the wife is working like a slave and the husband's sitting on the couch watching football. Really, it's meant to be this scenario where it's mutual. On the day of the wedding, one person looks at the other and basically says, "This is my life given for you. My whole being, my future, my present, everything I own, everything I am, I give it to you." Now, the other person doesn't respond by saying thank you. Thank you is not the appropriate response at that point. Because thank you is like saying, I'll take your gift, but I'm giving nothing back. The appropriate response is to say, and I give my life for you. Everything I am, everything I have, everything I will be. That's the essence of covenant. Now, the reason why this is so important to understand is because this is the reason why most people don't understand Christianity, if I can put it starkly here. We come to Mass not even understanding what the Mass actually is. We come here relating to God, not even understanding what that relationship's meant to be. Now, if I can try and put this in a bit of contrast. In this idea of covenant, as I said, it has to be mutual. There's almost like another unseen covenant which parents make with their children. Parents say to their children, look, I'm going to give everything I am to you, and I just hope that you're going to follow a few rules. Don't do anything stupid, don't hurt yourself, don't get arrested, okay? It's kind of like a disproportional covenant. The parent's doing everything, the child has very little to do. In the first reading, Jeremiah is talking about how God formed a covenant with his people. In the Old Testament, this covenant was kind of like a parent with a child. God said, I will give everything for you. I'll pour my life out for you, provide everything you desire. here are a couple of rules, don't do anything stupid. And the people broke the covenant, as every child breaks that covenant. They could not understand the relationship they were being brought into. They could not understand how God was providing so much for them. But what Jeremiah is now saying, the days are surely coming when God is going to create a new covenant. And this is not going to be the covenant of a parent with a child, but it's going to be like a covenant of marriage, where God is going to say, here is my body, here is my very life given for you. And I'm now asking you to reciprocate, to give the same thing back. And this is such a different covenant because whereas a child can't understand the parent, no matter how hard they try, it's a different world. But here, what Jeremiah is saying, in this new covenant, you are going to know me. You are going to understand me in the same way that a married couple understand each other. Because you are going to start to enter into my life and we're going to share the same vision, the same mission for the world. And the more you enter into that, the more you're going to know my heart. Now, this is profound, what Jesus is presenting to us here. As we are going to go towards Easter and we celebrate the Last Supper, and Jesus says, I'm establishing a new covenant in my blood, a covenant which will now be ratified by my death upon the cross, a covenant which is made real to you by me giving myself to you in the Eucharist, emptying everything, lowering myself to the level of bread to give myself to you. The problem is that we approach this covenant from the perspective of children. We come to this still thinking that we're just kids who have to follow the rules, and still thinking like children who are just consumers. I come to Mass, I want to receive Jesus, I go home, end of story. I behave. And if I don't, I go to confession. And we've missed the point. What this is actually meant to be is a wedding every single time we come to Mass. The reason why you walk down the aisle to receive Jesus in communion is because you're the bride coming to the bridegroom. And you need to recognize what the bridegroom is saying in his vows, because he's asking you to say the same vows back. We hear something of this in the gospel. Jesus stating his intention, what the mission is. Unless a wheat grain falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single grain. But if it dies, it yields a rich harvest. Anyone who loves his life loses it. Anyone who hates his life in this world will keep it for the eternal life. What he's presenting to us there is this paradox, this mystery, which all of you who are married know perfectly well. Life comes through death. Sacrifice bears fruit in the life of the next generation. And this is what Jesus is calling us to do. He's saying, if you want to be part of me, are you prepared to join me in this act of self-emptying? This act of constantly pouring everything out for the life of the world. And together we will bear fruit, not just for the next generation, but for eternity. That's the covenant we're being drawn into. We are not consumers, but we are active participants in his sacrifice. We are being called to join him on the cross. And that looks different for every single one of you. That sacrifice, that laying down of your life has such a unique image in every single one of your vocations. But the heart of it is the same. As I said, every time we come to the Mass, We're renewing the covenant. Jesus stands here in the person of the priest and he says, "This is my body given for you." My question to you is, can you honestly say the same thing back to him? Can you look at Jesus in the Eucharist and say, "Jesus, this is my body given for you. I reciprocate your vows. This is my life, entirely, completely given for your mission. I'm not drawing a distinction between my spiritual life and the rest of my life. Because if I'm united with you, all of it has to be united with you." This is what the mystery of Easter is about. This is the invitation that he draws us to every time we come to the Mass. Let's take this time, I think, really just to reassess our understanding of Christianity. As I started off saying, the beautiful vision of marriage gets smothered by culture. In the same way, the beauty of Christ's calling has become smothered by a church culture, which says you don't have to actually respond. You don't have to be a disciple. Let's strip away all that baggage and come back to the core of this message. And as we now hear these words spoken in the Eucharist, and we recognise Christ giving himself to us, I want to really invite you to step down this aisle as though this was a wedding day for you, recognising who you are receiving and who you're uniting yourself with.